Might as well sign the discharge to hospice paperwork now, save everybody the trouble. That's what my son said to a nurse, 6 feet from my bed, like I was a couch nobody wanted to move anymore. For 3 full seconds after he said it, nobody in that room moved either. The heart monitor kept its steady little chirp, indifferent to what had just happened. The IV pump clicked through its cycle. A cartwheel squeaked somewhere out in the hallway and kept going, because the world doesn't stop just because your own child has decided you're already furniture. I lay there with a tube taped to the back of my hand and understood, for the first time in 63 years, exactly what it feels like to be talked about instead of talked to, the way you'd discuss a filing cabinet. Nobody has the heart to haul to the dump yet. My name is Grant Ashworth. I spent 31 years as a forensic document examiner, the kind of work most people don't know exists until they need it badly, authenticating wills, catching forged signatures on deeds, testifying in courtrooms about ink density and pen pressure and the particular tremor a person's hand makes when they're signing something they don't understand. I built that practice from a card table in my garage into a firm that banks and estate attorneys across 3 counties trusted with their ugliest disputes. I raised 2 kids mostly on my own during the years. My late wife Eleanor volunteered 60 hours a month at the hospital that would, decades later, be the one keeping me alive. I paid off both my children's college tuition in full, co-signed Marcus's first business loan, and never once asked for interest, gratitude, or a receipt. I tell you these numbers not to make myself sound like a saint, because I wasn't one, but because you need to understand the shape of what I gave before you understand the shape of what got taken. I want to back up further than the hospital room, though, because none of what happened there makes sense without Eleanor. We met at a county courthouse in 1988, of all places, me testifying about a contested will, her sitting in the gallery, because she volunteered doing intake for elderly clients who couldn't navigate the paperwork alone. She caught me in the hallway afterward and told me, flat out, that my testimony had been the most boring thing she'd ever heard delivered with that much conviction. I told her boring was the whole point. Juries don't trust excitement from a man talking about ink chemistry. She laughed, and I married that laugh 11 months later in her mother's backyard in Elk Grove, under a rented arbor neither of us could afford, with Marcus not yet born and Whitney not yet a thought in either of our heads. Eleanor was warmer than me in every way that mattered. She remembered birthdays I forgot. She hugged people I would have shaken hands with. She spent 3 decades doing hospital patient advocacy work, unpaid, because she believed nobody should have to face a diagnosis alone in a waiting room, and somewhere in that work she became close with more doctors and nurses at Providence Regional than I ever got close to in my own line of work. I used to tease her that she probably knew the hospital's org chart better than the CEO did. She'd just smile and say, "You never know when you'll need a friend in a place like that, Grant." I thought that was just Eleanor being Eleanor. I didn't know it yet, but she meant it as something closer to a plan. 2 years ago, ovarian cancer took her in 4 months flat, faster than any of us were braced for. Her surgeon during that stretch was a woman named Dr. Sofia Reyes, sharp-eyed, quiet, the kind of doctor who sits down instead of hovering when she delivers bad news. Eleanor liked her immediately, in that instinctive way Eleanor liked almost everyone. Toward the end, the 2 of them spent long stretches alone together during rounds, Eleanor talking, Reyes listening, and I never once asked what about. Because a dying woman is entitled to conversations that belong only to her. I regret that now, the not asking. Not because I think I could have stopped what came later, but because there's a version of this story where I know sooner, and knowing sooner might have spared me a little. I should tell you about the incident with Marcus, too, because it matters more than I understood at the time. Marcus is my son, 36 now, a financial planner with a nice office downtown, and an ex-wife's worth of charm he inherited from nobody in particular. When he was 24, fresh out of finance school and hungry in a way that worried me even then, an elderly client of mine, a widow named Carol Denby, sweet and slightly forgetful, changed her will twice in 1 year, both times naming a new financial advisor as a modest beneficiary. That advisor was Marcus. I caught the pattern in my own review of her documents before it went anywhere, flagged it to Carol's attorney, and the whole thing got quietly unwound before it became a scandal. Eleanor handled the family side of that mess. She sat Marcus down, alone, and whatever she told him, he never tried anything like it again. Not that we knew of, anyway. I chalked it up to a young man's bad judgment corrected in time. I didn't know it yet, but Eleanor filed that afternoon away somewhere I couldn't see. The way you'd file away a hairline crack in a foundation you weren't ready to admit was cracked. I need to tell you one more thing about myself before we get back to that hospital room, and it isn't flattering. I don't do hospital corridors well. Haven't since Eleanor. There's a particular three-note chime the PA system plays at Providence Regional before certain announcements, and the first time I heard it again after she died, walking in for an unrelated appointment, my knees genuinely buckled in the hallway. No warning, no story behind it that made sense to anyone watching. Just a 63-year-old man gripping a handrail like it owed him money. I never told Marcus or Whitney about that. I never told anyone, except Dale, my oldest friend, a retired county detective who'd worked cases alongside my document testimony for 2 decades and had long since earned the right to see me at my worst. I'm not a hero in this story, whatever else it turns into. I'm a man who still flinches at a hospital chime 2 years later and never fixed it, because fixing it felt like one more thing I'd have to do without her. The stroke happened on a Tuesday morning in my own kitchen, my left hand suddenly refusing to hold a coffee mug, the room tilting sideways like a boat catching a wave. I don't remember calling 911. Dale told me later I'd apparently managed it myself. Slurred but coherent enough for the dispatcher to send a unit. I remember waking up in the ER with Whitney's face above mine, pale and frightened in a way that, in that first moment, still looked like love. Marcus and his wife Vanessa arrived a few hours later. For the first 2 days it looked like ordinary family crisis behavior. Coffee cups accumulating on the windowsill, Whitney sleeping in the recliner, Marcus making calls in the hallway about handling things at work so he could be present. I was grateful. I was, God help me, moved. Then, on day 3, the visits started thinning. Whitney still came, though her visits grew shorter, her eyes darting toward her phone. Marcus stopped coming altogether except for brief clipped appearances, where he stood by the door instead of the bed, always with a folder tucked under his arm, always leaving faster than he'd arrived. On day 5, unable to sleep, aching to move a body that mostly wouldn't cooperate yet, I asked the night nurse to help me to the recliner instead of the bed, just for a change of angle. She stepped out to get a second pair of hands. And that's when I heard Marcus's voice through the half-open door, close enough that he clearly didn't know I was awake, or didn't care. Might as well sign the discharge to hospice paperwork now, save everybody the trouble. That was the sentence. The one that opened this whole story. The nurse he said it to, I recognized her voice. A younger one named Priya, who'd been kind to me, went quiet for a beat too long before answering. Careful. Professional. Mr. Ashworth's prognosis is actually quite good, sir. He's expected to regain most function within weeks. Right, Marcus said, and I heard the particular flatness in his voice that I remembered from every argument we'd ever had about money. Well, we'll see. I lay there afterward. I hadn't made it to the recliner yet. I was still flat on my back, staring at ceiling tiles I'd counted 40 times already, and did the thing grief and shock apparently both do to a person, which is nothing. I didn't cry. I didn't call for anyone. I just lay there feeling something in my chest fold in on itself, quiet and complete, like a document being creased along a line that was always going to be there eventually. A man spends 30 years teaching himself to read what's true in a signature, in a stroke of ink, in the tremor of somebody's hand, and somehow it takes his own son standing 6 feet away, talking about him like inventory, for him to finally read what's been sitting in his own family the whole time. I didn't know it yet, but that overheard sentence was the smallest, cheapest piece of what was already in motion. 2 days later, a hospital social worker named Denise Okafor stopped by my room with a clipboard and a gentleness in her voice that immediately told me something was wrong before she said a word. Mr. Ashworth, I wanted to let you know your son has filed paperwork with the county requesting a temporary emergency guardianship, citing concerns about your cognitive capacity following the stroke. There's also a competency evaluation scheduled for Thursday. I asked her, calm as I could manage, whether that was normal after a stroke like mine. She hesitated in the particular way professionals hesitate when they already suspect the answer isn't clean. It happens sometimes. Usually when families are being cautious, occasionally. She stopped herself, then finished anyway, because I think some instinct in her recognized I could handle it. Occasionally it happens for other reasons. I asked what other reasons looked like. She didn't answer that one. She didn't have to. I'd spent 3 decades reading the difference between an honest signature and a frightened one, and I understood exactly what kind of paperwork I was looking at, even without seeing it. That night, unable to sleep again, I called Dale. He picked up on the second ring, the way he always does, like some part of him has been waiting by the phone for 30 years for exactly this kind of call. Grant, it's midnight. You're supposed to be resting. Marcus filed for guardianship over me, I said. Emergency guardianship, while I'm still lying in this bed. There was a long pause on the line, the kind Dale only does when he's actually thinking instead of reacting. Tell me everything, he said finally. From the beginning. Don't skip the part where you talk yourself out of believing it because I already know that part's coming. So I told him. The overheard sentence in the hallway. The thinning visits. The clipboard and the social worker's careful hesitation. Marcus's folder he kept tucked under his arm like a man carrying evidence he didn't want examined too closely. You know what this smells like, Dale said, not a question. I know what it smells like, I said. I've smelled it in other people's families for 30 years. I never thought I'd smell it in my own kitchen. You want me to look into it? Quiet, careful. Nothing that tips anybody off before you're ready? I looked at the ceiling tile directly above my bed, the one with the water stain shaped almost like a signature flourish, and thought about Eleanor, and about Carol Denby's will 2 decades ago, and about a version of my son I'd apparently spent years refusing to look at directly. Yeah, I said. Start with the guardianship filing. Find out who's handling it legally. And Dale, find out who's really behind it, because that wasn't Marcus's voice I heard giving orders in that hallway. That was somebody else's voice coming out of his mouth. I didn't know yet how right that instinct was. I only knew that somewhere in the last 5 days, the son I'd spent 36 years loving had become a stranger standing at the foot of my bed, and I intended to find out exactly who had taught him to stand there. The next morning brought a knock at my door I wasn't expecting. A woman in scrubs and a white coat, dark hair pulled back, a badge that read Dr. Rice, General Surgery. She stood in the doorway a beat longer than a routine consult usually warrants, studying my face like she was double-checking something against a memory. Mr. Ashworth, she said slowly. Grant Ashworth, Eleanor's husband. Something in my chest went very still. You knew my wife. I was her surgeon, Dr. Reyes said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her with a care that told me this wasn't going to be a 2-minute conversation. 2 years ago. I've thought about her more than most patients I've had, if I'm honest. She was. Reyes paused, choosing the word carefully. She was a remarkable woman, and she asked me to hold on to something for her. Something I was told only to give you if a very specific situation ever happened. My mouth had gone dry in a way no amount of hospital ice chips was going to fix. What situation? Dr. Reyes looked at the closed door once, like she was making sure of something, then back at me, her voice dropping low and steady. She made me promise, Mr. Ashworth. If your children ever turned on you over money, if it ever got as far as guardianship paperwork, I was to come find you myself and put something directly in your hands. She reached into the inner pocket of her white coat. I heard about the filing yesterday. I checked the patient roster this morning and saw your name, and I nearly dropped my coffee in the hallway. She held out a plain white envelope, aged at the corners, my name written across the front in Eleanor's unmistakable looping hand. The same hand I'd watched sign 3 decades of birthday cards, grocery lists, and 1 wedding certificate under a rented arbor in Elk Grove. I didn't know it yet. Sitting there with that envelope trembling slightly in my one good hand, But my wife had died 2 years ago already, knowing exactly what kind of storm was coming for me. And she'd spent her last months quietly building me a lifeboat instead of telling me the water was rising. Dr. Reyes stayed while I opened it, which I was grateful for, because my one working hand made the flap difficult, and because some part of me needed a witness who wasn't a nurse checking my blood pressure. Inside was a single folded page, Eleanor's handwriting filling both sides, and a smaller sealed note beneath it that simply read, in her hand, "For Diane Foster only. Do not open, Grant. This one isn't for you." I read the main letter twice before I trusted my own eyes. "My dearest Grant," it began, "if Sophia is handing you this, it means the thing I hope never to be right about has happened. And I am so sorry I'm not there to hold your hand through it the way you held mine for 11 years of the worst days I ever had." She wrote about Carol Denby. Not in detail, just enough to remind me. "You remember what Marcus tried at 24, and you remember I told you I'd handled it. I did handle it. But handling a thing quietly once doesn't mean it's gone, Grant. It just means it's waiting for a better opportunity." And I never stopped watching for the day it came back different and bigger. She wrote about how much she loved our son anyway, how she never stopped hoping she was wrong about the shape of what she saw forming in him, and how 3 years before she died, when the fear finally outweighed the hope, she'd gone to see an estate attorney named Diane Foster on her own, without telling me, and built something into our family trust that would take teeth only if it was ever needed. "I didn't tell you," she wrote, "because you would have confronted him immediately, and I wasn't ready to lose him before I lost my own life first. I wanted us to have whatever good years were left without that fight sitting at the table with us. Forgive me for the secret, my love. I only ever kept it to protect the time we had." The last line of the letter was the one that undid me completely, the one I've since had memorized without meaning to memorize it. "Trust Sophia, trust Diane, and Grant, please don't let this turn you bitter, even if it turns you fierce. Our children were both good once. I need you to remember that while you fight, because I think you'll need it more than you expect to." I sat there with that page in my lap for a long time, Dr. Reyes quiet in the chair beside me, not filling the silence the way most people feel compelled to. Finally, I asked her the only question that mattered. "Did she tell you anything else? Anything specific about what she thought might happen?" Reyes shook her head. "No specifics." She was very deliberate about that, actually. I remember her saying almost exactly what's in that letter, that she didn't want to poison your view of your own son with a guess that might be wrong. She just wanted you to have somebody in your corner who already knew, in case the worst version of things came true. She hesitated. "For what it's worth, Mr. Ashworth, she talked about you more than she talked about her diagnosis. I've done this job 12 years. Most people at the end talk mostly about themselves. Your wife talked about protecting you. I called Diane Foster that afternoon, my hand still not fully cooperating on the phone's buttons, Dr. Reyes having left me the firm's card tucked inside Eleanor's envelope. Diane picked up on the first ring, and when I gave her my name, there was a pause exactly like Dr. Reyes's had been, the pause of someone who'd been half expecting this call for 2 years and hoping it would never come. "Mr. Ashworth, I was so sorry about Eleanor. I've been waiting to hear from you, though I confess I hoped it would be under better circumstances than a guardianship filing." Her voice was brisk, competent, the voice of a lawyer who does not waste a client's time or her own. "I take it Sophia found you." "She found me," I said. "I'm holding a letter I don't fully understand yet, and a second sealed note that says it's for you only. And I'm lying in a hospital bed while my son tries to get a judge to declare me incompetent to manage my own affairs." "Then let's fix that," Diane said, no drama in it at all, just the flat competence of a woman getting to work. "First, the mechanics, so you understand your position. 3 years ago, your wife came to me and restructured a portion of the family trust, specifically the portion that would eventually pass through your estate to your children. She built in a provision requiring an independent, licensed fiduciary review before any competency-based transfer of trustee authority could take effect, regardless of what any family member petitions for in probate court. It's an unusual clause. Most people don't think to protect themselves from their own children. Eleanor did. Is that legal? Binding? Completely. She was the co-owner of those assets and had every right to structure protections around her own portion of the trust however she saw fit. It doesn't stop Marcus from filing a guardianship petition. Anyone can file a petition, but it means that even if a judge grants temporary guardianship over your person for medical decisions, he cannot simply walk into your accounts and start moving money, not without that independent fiduciary signing off first. And Mr. Ashworth, I already got a call 2 days ago from that fiduciary. She flagged unusual account activity and reached out to me directly, per the terms Eleanor set up. Someone tried. The room went very quiet around me, the way it had gone quiet 5 days earlier when I first heard Marcus's voice through that half-open door. Tried what, exactly? An attempt to open a new limited power of attorney using a signature purportedly yours, dated the day after your stroke, submitted to your primary bank branch. The bank's fraud department flagged it before it processed. The signature didn't match your file signature closely enough to clear their internal review, and separately, the fiduciary review clause automatically froze any structural changes the moment the filing hit the system. It's sitting in a compliance queue right now. Nothing moved. But somebody tried to move it, and they tried fast. I asked her to send me everything she had. She said she'd have copies at the hospital within the hour, and that she was, as of this call, officially my attorney of record, whether or not I'd formally hired her yet. Eleanor, apparently, had retained her for exactly this contingency and prepaid a retainer that had been sitting untouched in a trust account for 3 years, waiting. I hung up the phone and sat there feeling something I hadn't expected to feel in the middle of all this. Not just fear, not just grief freshly reopened, but a strange, steadying gratitude. The kind you feel when you realize somebody loved you carefully enough to plan for a version of the world she hoped would never arrive. Dale showed up that evening carrying a gas station coffee for himself and a contraband milkshake for me that the nurses would absolutely have confiscated if they'd seen it, and I told him everything. The letter, Diane Foster, the frozen power of attorney, the fraud flag at the bank. He sat there listening the way he always listens, elbows on his knees, not interrupting, and when I finished, he didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he set his coffee down, stood up, and did something Dale Pruitt has done exactly twice in the 31 years I've known him. The first time at Eleanor's funeral, and now this. He put both arms around me, careful of the IV line, and held on. She was always smarter than both of us combined, he said, voice rougher than I'd ever heard it. Even from 2 years gone, she's still 3 steps ahead of everybody in this hospital. I let myself hold on to him back, tube and all, and for about 10 seconds, I stopped being a man defending himself against his own son and just let myself be a man who missed his wife. I need the signature, I said finally, pulling back and wiping my face with the back of my working hand. The one on that forged power of attorney. I need to see it. You're not exactly in a position to be running your own forensic exam right now, Grant. I've got 1 working hand and 31 years of muscle memory in it, I said. Get me the copy. Diane's paralegal delivered a full packet within the hour, and there, 3rd page in, was the power of attorney document, my name typed at the top, a signature at the bottom that, to any untrained eye, would have looked convincingly like mine. I held the page up to the window light, angling it the way I'd angled 10,000 pages before it, across 3 decades of testimony, studying the pressure variance, the stroke order, the tiny hesitation marks that a real signature almost never has, because a real signature is muscle memory, not performance. It was wrong in 4 places. The pen lift before the A in Ashworth, where my own hand has never once lifted in 30 years of signing my name. The pressure taper at the end of the final flourish, too even, too deliberate, a forger's hand, working slow and careful, trying too hard to be casual. The baseline drift, subtle but present, the kind you get from someone tracing over a reference signature rather than writing from memory, and the ink itself. A gel pen. When every document I'd signed for that bank in 15 years had been signed with the same blue ballpoint I keep clipped in my shirt pocket, the one that was, at that exact moment, still clipped in the shirt pocket of the clothes hanging in my hospital closet, untouched since the morning of my stroke. This wasn't signed by me, I said. mostly to myself. And it wasn't signed by an amateur either. Whoever forged this had access to real reference signatures and knew enough to be careful. That's not Marcus. Marcus barely remembers to sign his own kids' permission slips on time. Dale leaned over my shoulder, studying the page like he could see what I saw, though of course he couldn't. Not really. That kind of reading takes 30 years to earn. So who does that sound like? I thought about the folder Marcus kept tucked under his arm on every brief, hurried visit. I thought about Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, whom I'd always found pleasant enough in the shallow way you find a coworker's spouse pleasant. Polished, quick with compliments, always steering conversation gently toward real estate values and market timing at family dinners, in a way I'd chalked up to professional habit rather than anything sharper. I thought about how, in 5 days of hospitalization, Vanessa had visited exactly once for 11 minutes and spent most of it on her phone in the hallway. I don't know yet, I said, but I intend to find out, and Dale, I need you to look into Vanessa, quietly. Whatever you find, I want it before Thursday's competency hearing. Thursday was 3 days away. 3 days to build, out of a forged signature and a dead wife's careful planning. Enough of a case to keep a judge from handing my own life over to people who'd already tried to steal it once. Whitney visited the next morning, alone, without Marcus, sitting in the chair Dr. Reyes had occupied 2 days before, twisting her wedding ring the way she'd done as a nervous kid before every piano recital she ever played. I watched her for a long moment before saying anything, and something in her face told me she already suspected I knew more than I had 3 days earlier. "Dad," she said finally, "I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it without sounding like I'm making excuses for myself. Because I don't think there are any good ones. Say it anyway," I said. "Marcus came to me about 2 months ago, before your stroke. He said Vanessa had been talking to him about how it might be smart for the family to get organized in case something ever happened to you. Guardianship paperwork, updated power of attorney, all of it just in case." She swallowed. "I should have called you immediately. I should have asked why anyone was talking about in case something happened to a perfectly healthy 63-year-old man. Instead, I let it sit there. I told myself it was probably nothing. And then you actually had the stroke, and everything moved so fast. And I kept telling myself I'd say something once things calmed down. And they never calmed down. They just kept sliding. Now I'm sitting here and you already know. Don't you? You already know." I stayed quiet. I looked at my daughter, 33 years old, twisting that ring around her finger the exact way she used to twist it as an 8-year-old before playing Fur Elise in front of an auditorium full of parents, terrified of getting one note wrong. And I thought about how much of parenting is watching your children inherit your own worst habits without ever meaning to teach them. "I know," I said. "I'm not going to pretend it doesn't sting, Whitney. It does. But I need you now more than I need an apology for 2 months ago. Can I count on that?" She nodded, and something in her face steadied. The particular look of a person who has just been handed a second chance and understands exactly how much it's worth. "Whatever you need, I'll do whatever you need." I told her, then, about the letter, about Diane Foster, about the frozen power of attorney sitting in a compliance queue at the bank. I watched her face move through disbelief, then something colder and more focused, an expression I recognized because I'd worn it myself for 31 years across a witness stand. "There's something else," Whitney said slowly once I'd finished. "Vanessa's been different for about a year. Distracted. Robert and I had dinner with them in March, and she excused herself 4 times to take calls in the other room. And there's a man, a paralegal, I think, works at the firm Marcus and Vanessa use for the Knafley stuff, who's been at their house more than seems normal for just work. Kevin's somebody. I always figured it was nothing. I don't figure that anymore." I filed that name away next to everything Dale was already digging up, and felt the shape of this thing shifting under my hands. The way a document does sometimes when you realize the signature you're studying isn't the real forgery at all, just the visible edge of one. Thursday's competency hearing was 2 days away now. And somewhere out there, a paralegal named Kevin was sitting on whatever truth had turned my daughter-in-law into a woman who couldn't sit through a single family dinner without leaving the room. Dale called me Friday morning, a full day before Thursday's hearing, even though by my count today should have been Thursday. The hearing had been pushed to Monday instead. A delay Diane Foster had engineered by filing an emergency motion citing the bank's fraud flag as grounds for additional review time. Small mercies. 4 extra days felt in that hospital bed, like 4 extra years. I found your paralegal, Dale said, no greeting, the way he does when he's got something worth skipping pleasantries for. Kevin Marsh, 29, works at Halloran and Voss, the elder law firm Marcus and Vanessa use. And Grant, he called me. I didn't even have to knock on his door. Somebody at that firm mentioned around the office that a private investigator had been asking questions about the Ashworth guardianship filing. And by yesterday afternoon, Kevin Marsh had my cell number and a story he apparently couldn't hold in his stomach anymore. What's the story? He prepared that power of attorney. Under instruction from a senior partner named Todd Kessler, who apparently handles what Kevin called the sensitive accounts for a small handful of clients who pay extra for a certain kind of discretion. Kevin says Vanessa's been meeting privately with Kessler for close to a year, not romantically. Or not only that, Kevin wasn't entirely sure, but definitely financially. Turns out your daughter-in-law has about $200,000 in stock trading losses she's been hiding from Marcus. Run up over 18 months, chasing bad tips, Kessler kept feeding her. And Kessler's been the one steering the whole guardianship idea from the start, packaging it to Vanessa as a completely legal way to access family liquidity early, before the losses became impossible to explain. Something cold settled in my chest. The particular clarity that comes when a shape you'd been squinting at finally resolves. So Vanessa didn't dream this up on her own. Kevin doesn't think so. He thinks she's in over her head and terrified. And Kessler's been managing her the exact same way you'd manage a client into a bad investment. Flattery, urgency, the sense that there's no other way out. He forged your signature himself, Grant. Practiced off 3 old documents Vanessa lifted from a filing box at your house during a visit last spring. Kevin says he only agreed to type up the paperwork because Kessler told him it was a formality. Everyone in the family had already agreed to. Once he found out it wasn't, once he heard through the office grapevine that there'd never been a family conversation at all, he says he hasn't slept right in 4 days. I sat with that for a long moment, watching the water stain on the ceiling tile that still, 4 days later, looked exactly like a signature flourish to me. Will he testify to it? Voluntarily, in writing to Diane? He already gave me a signed statement, Dale said. Wanted it off his conscience before I even asked twice. Kid's not a criminal, Grant. He's a 29-year-old who got told a lie by somebody he trusted more than he should have, and he's paying for it with about a week of very bad sleep. I believe him. I thought about Marcus, and about what it would mean to learn your own wife had spent a year hiding 6-figure losses and colluding with another man to steal from your father, all while you stood in a hospital hallway saying things about paperwork you probably didn't fully understand yourself. I felt, against every instinct telling me not to, a flicker of something almost like pity for my son. Almost. Send everything to Diane, I said. And Dale, thank you. I mean that. You've spent the better part of a week chasing my family's rot through half of Sacramento, and you haven't once made me feel foolish for not seeing it sooner. You'd have done the same for me, Dale said, which was true, and which was exactly the kind of thing old friends say to each other, instead of saying the harder true thing, which is that some debts between people who love you can't be repaid, only carried forward. Whitney brought her daughter Lily to visit that Saturday, a small, determined 7-year-old with her mother's same nervous habit of twisting things, a hair tie instead of a ring, in her case, and a stuffed rabbit named Colonel Fluff that had, according to Lily, survived 2 washing machine incidents and 1 near-catastrophic loss at a rest stop outside Reno. I was sitting up in bed by then, most of my left side function returning in fits and starts, well enough to hold the rabbit properly when Lily insisted I needed him for luck, because Grandma Eleanor always said stuffed animals hold luck better than people do. They don't get distracted. She climbed up carefully onto the edge of my bed, Whitney hovering nearby with the particular anxiety of a parent, watching a child interact with hospital equipment, and studied my face with the unnerving directness only children manage. "Grandpa, why is Daddy trying to make you go away?" The room went very still, the way it does around a child's question that nobody adult in the vicinity was prepared to answer honestly. Whitney's mouth opened, some redirect already forming, but I held up my working hand, gently, and she let it go. "I don't think your daddy fully understands what he's doing yet, sweetheart," I said, choosing every word the way I used to choose words on a witness stand, careful, true, appropriate for the person receiving them. Sometimes grown-ups get scared or confused, and instead of asking for help, they do things that hurt the people who love them most. It doesn't mean he stopped loving me. It just means he got lost somewhere along the way. Lily considered this with a terrible seriousness only a 7-year-old can bring to a hospital bed conversation. Grandma Eleanor used to say being lost isn't the same as being gone. She said you can always find your way back if somebody leaves the porch light on. She looked down at Colonel Fluff, then back up at me. "Are you leaving the porch light on for Daddy?" I felt my throat close entirely, and I had to look at the ceiling tile for a second before I trusted my voice again. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think I am, even now." Whitney had her hand pressed hard against her mouth, and when I glanced over, her eyes were wet in a way that had nothing to do with the antiseptic hospital air. That night, once Lily and Whitney had gone and the room had settled into its usual after-hours quiet, the hum of the monitor, the distant murmur of the nurse's station, the particular loneliness of a hospital at 10 p.m. I let myself think honestly, for the first time in days, about my own share of blame in all of this. Because Eleanor's letter had said something I hadn't let myself sit with yet. Our children were both good once. I thought about how many dinners I'd missed building that practice from a card table into a firm. How many recitals and games I'd sent Eleanor to, alone while I sat in some courthouse hallway waiting to testify about somebody else's family's broken trust, never once looking hard enough at my own. I thought about how, when Marcus was 24 and I caught him circling an elderly widow's will, I'd let Eleanor handle the conversation entirely, relieved to not have to say the hard thing myself. Telling myself I was respecting her instincts, when really, I think I was just avoiding my son's disappointment in me. I'd spent 30 years catching other families' fault lines under a magnifying glass, and somehow managed to miss the one running straight through my own kitchen table. I didn't say any of that out loud to anyone that night, but I filed it away the way I file away every hard truth I've ever had to face on a witness stand, not to punish myself with it forever, but to make sure I never mistook myself for blameless again. Monday's hearing came and went faster than I expected, and less decisively than I'd hoped. The judge, a tired, careful woman named Judge Alvarez, who'd clearly seen every version of this dispute cross her courtroom before, reviewed the bank's fraud flag, Diane's motion, and Kevin Marsh's signed statement with visible interest, but ultimately ruled that given the seriousness of the allegations on both sides, she wanted a full evidentiary hearing in 3 weeks rather than a snap decision, and in the meantime she granted a modified temporary arrangement. No guardianship transfer of any kind. Full financial protections remaining frozen exactly as Eleanor's trust clause had already ensured, but ongoing medical decision support authorized jointly between myself, once discharged, and Whitney, specifically excluding Marcus and Vanessa from any authority whatsoever pending the full hearing. It wasn't a total victory. But it was daylight where 5 days earlier there'd been none, and Diane assured me, gathering her files afterward in the small conference room they'd wheeled me into for the proceeding, that a full evidentiary hearing with Kevin Marsh's testimony and the forensic signature analysis I intended to conduct myself would end the matter permanently, one way or another, in 3 weeks' time. 3 weeks, I said. That's a long time to sit across a dinner table from people you know tried to steal your life out from under you. You don't have to sit across any dinner tables, Diane said. But there is one thing coming up sooner that might be worth your presence if you're strong enough for it. Providence Regional is dedicating a new patient advocacy wing in 11 days. Named after Eleanor, actually. She raised most of the funding for it before she died, quietly, the way she did most things. The hospital's been planning the ceremony for months. Sofia Reyes mentioned it to me when we spoke last week. She thought you should know, in case you wanted to be there. I sat with that for a long moment, something in my chest turning over slowly, gently, like a page finally settling flat after being folded too long. Eleanor, who'd spent her whole life building quiet protections nobody saw until they needed them, was about to have her name put permanently on the wall of the very hospital where, it turned out, she'd also spent her final months building the exact protection I needed most. "I'll be there," I said. "Discharged or not, I'll be there." I didn't know it yet, but that dedication ceremony, Eleanor's ceremony, 11 days out, full of hospital staff and community members and a plaque with her name on it, was about to become the place where everything I'd spent the last week and a half building would finally come to a head, in front of more witnesses than I'd ever imagined my own family's unraveling would need. 11 days is a long time to heal a stroke and prepare to face your own family in public, but I had good reason to move faster than my doctors expected. I did the physical therapy exercises they gave me with something close to fury, gripping a rubber ball until my knuckles ached, walking laps around the ward railing until Nurse Priya started timing me with a stopwatch just to keep me from overdoing it. By day 9, I was discharged, walking with a cane but walking, my left hand steady enough again to hold a pen, which mattered more to me that week than almost anything else. I spent the 2 days before the ceremony back in my own study, at my own desk, doing the one thing I still knew how to do better than anyone else alive, reading a signature for what it actually says. Diane sent over the full forensic packet from the bank's fraud department, and I sat there with my magnifying loupe and 31 years of muscle memory, confirming in writing, under my own professional letterhead, exactly what I'd already known lying in that hospital bed. The power of attorney was a forgery, executed with real skill but real telltale flaws, consistent in every particular with Kevin Marsh's account of a document typed under Todd Kessler's instruction and traced from 3 old reference signatures. I signed my own report with my own blue ballpoint pen, the one that had been sitting untouched in my hospital closet the whole time somebody else was trying to imitate it, and felt something settle in my chest that had nothing to do with vindication and everything to do with simply finally being believed by the one person whose belief I'd started to doubt hardest. Myself. Marcus called me twice during those 2 days. I didn't answer either time. I wasn't ready, and some part of me, the part that still remembered a 6-year-old boy falling asleep against my shoulder during long drives to his grandmother's house, needed to see his face when I finally did talk to him, needed to watch what happened in his eyes when the truth about Vanessa and Kessler landed somewhere he couldn't perform his way around. That chance came the morning of the ceremony itself, an hour before the dedication, in a small conference room off the hospital's main lobby, where Diane had arranged, at my request, a private meeting. Myself, Diane, Marcus, Vanessa, and a Providence regional compliance officer who'd need to be present given the fraud allegations touching the hospital's own systems. I wanted this part done quietly, away from cameras, away from Eleanor's ceremony. Some confrontations belong behind closed doors, and I'd learned, watching 31 years of family disputes cross my own examination table, that airing a person's worst financial secrets in front of a crowd rarely produces truth. It mostly just produces defensiveness dressed up as spectacle. Marcus looked terrible when he walked in, hollow around the eyes in a way that told me he already suspected what was coming. Vanessa looked worse, her polish gone entirely, replaced by something brittle and frightened that I almost felt sorry for. Diane laid it out plainly. Without theater, Kevin Marsh's signed statement, the forensic signature report bearing my own professional certification, the bank's independent fraud flag, and finally, gently but directly, the 18 months of trading losses Vanessa had hidden from her own husband, while Todd Kessler steered her toward a scheme that used an ailing father-in-law as the exit ramp for her own financial panic. Marcus turned to Vanessa slowly, and I watched something break open on his face that I recognized immediately, because I'd worn that exact expression myself once, watching an elderly widow discover what her own trusted advisor had done to her savings. $200,000, he said, voice barely above a whisper. You told me the market was just soft this year. You told me we were fine. I was going to fix it, Vanessa said. And her voice cracked exactly the way a voice cracks when a performance finally runs out of road. Todd said this was the only clean way to access enough liquidity fast enough before anyone noticed the losses. He said your father wouldn't even feel it, that it was just paperwork, that families do this kind of thing all the time when someone's older, and he wouldn't even feel it, I repeated, quiet, and something in my voice made her stop entirely. I felt every second of it, Vanessa. I felt it in a hospital bed with a tube in my hand, listening to my own son through a half-open door talking about signing me over to hospice paperwork like I was already gone. Marcus made a sound then, something close to a sob he clearly hadn't expected to make in front of a compliance officer and his father's attorney, and he put both hands over his face for a long moment. When he lowered them, he looked directly at me, and whatever performance had carried him through the last 2 weeks had finally completely run out. I said that, he said. That thing about hospice paperwork, I've thought about it every single day since. I don't even fully understand why I said it, Dad. I think Vanessa had been so scared and so urgent about needing to move fast, and I let myself believe it was about efficiency, about doing the practical thing. And somewhere underneath all of it, I think I was scared too, scared of losing you the way we lost Mom. And I turned that fear into something ugly, instead of just telling you I was scared. I'm not asking you to forgive that today. I don't think I've earned the right to ask for that yet. I sat with that for a long moment, thinking about Eleanor's letter, about the line that had undone me most. Our children were both good once, and about how a man can be genuinely afraid and genuinely wrong in the exact same breath, the way most people usually are. You're right, I said. You haven't earned it yet, but I'm not interested in spending whatever years I have left refusing to let you try. I looked between them both. Here's what happens now. Marcus, you're going to cooperate fully with the evidentiary hearing, and you're going to tell the truth about what you knew and when you knew it. Vanessa, you're going to do the same, and you're going to get real help for whatever's driving those trading losses, because $200,000 doesn't happen to a careful person by accident. Diane's drawing up a stipulation for you both, an acknowledgement that you were properly notified of the trust's independent fiduciary protections, and an agreement not to contest or pursue any further guardianship action. Sign it, and I'll ask the judge to consider the cooperation favorably at the hearing. Don't sign it, and we let the process run its full course publicly, with all of it in the record. Marcus signed without hesitation, his hand shaking slightly, the pen scratching the page in a rhythm I recognized instantly as genuinely, unmistakably his own. Vanessa signed after a longer pause, tears running steadily now, and I found I didn't need to feel triumphant watching it happen. I mostly just felt tired and sad and cautiously, carefully hopeful in a way I hadn't let myself feel in 11 days. The dedication ceremony began 40 minutes later in the hospital's central atrium, sunlight pouring through the skylights onto rows of folding chairs filled with hospital staff, board members, community volunteers. Eleanor had worked alongside for decades and, to my genuine surprise, gathering quietly near the back without announcement. Nearly a dozen families I recognized from Eleanor's old patient advocacy caseload, people she'd walked through their worst weeks years ago, standing there now simply because word had spread that today mattered. Dr. Ray spoke first, brief and warm, describing Eleanor's insistence during her own treatment that the hospital do more for patients navigating paperwork alone. Then the hospital administrator unveiled the plaque, the Eleanor Ashworth Patient Advocacy Wing, and invited me up to say a few words, which Diane had warned me might happen, and which I still wasn't fully prepared for. I stood at that podium with my cane in one hand, and Eleanor's letter folded small in my jacket pocket where it had lived for 11 days straight, and I found I didn't have a speech prepared at all. So I told them the truth instead. My wife spent 30 years making sure nobody in this building ever felt as alone as she was afraid people could feel here, I said. What most of you don't know is that in her last months, She was also quietly making sure I wouldn't be alone either. Long after she was gone, she left people in place to protect me, a surgeon, an attorney, a plan I didn't even know existed until I needed it most. I think that was Eleanor's whole philosophy, really. Love isn't just the thing you say out loud. Sometimes it's the paperwork nobody sees you filing, years before anybody else understands why it mattered. I hadn't meant to say anything more specific than that. But then, near the front row, Marcus stood up. The room went quiet, the particular way a room goes quiet when it senses something real is about to happen, no ceremony script accounting for it. Marcus walked up beside me at the podium, and for one terrible second I genuinely didn't know what he was about to do. "I need to say something," he said, voice unsteady but carrying clearly through the atrium's high ceiling. "Some of you probably know there's been trouble in our family the last couple weeks. I filed papers trying to take control away from my father while he was recovering from a stroke. I believed I was being practical. I was wrong, and I was manipulated, and worse than that, I let my own fear turn into something that hurt the person who's given me everything my whole life." He turned toward me, and his voice cracked entirely on the next line. "My mother spent her dying months protecting this man from exactly what I almost did to him. I don't get to stand up here today and pretend that isn't the truth, not in the room with her name on the wall." Somewhere behind me, I heard Whitney's voice, sharp, sudden, cutting through what might otherwise have become an awkward silence, standing up herself now beside her brother in front of the entire gathered crowd. "And I knew something was wrong for 2 months before Dad's stroke and said nothing. I'm done saying nothing. Whatever it takes to make this right, our family is doing it together, starting today." She reached over and took Marcus's hand, the two of them standing there in front of a room full of strangers and old friends, and for one long moment nobody moved at all, the whole atrium holding its breath, the way a courtroom holds its breath right before a verdict lands. Then, from the back of the room, one of Eleanor's old advocacy families, an elderly woman named Ruth Calloway, whose husband Eleanor had walked through a brain tumor diagnosis a decade earlier, stood up too, quietly, no words, just standing. And within a few seconds, a dozen more people who'd known Eleanor across 3 decades of quiet service stood with her, not applauding, not making a scene, just standing in support. The way Eleanor herself had always shown up for people, without fanfare, simply present. I felt Dr. Reyes's hand rest briefly on my shoulder from beside the podium, and I looked down at the folded letter in my jacket pocket, and I understood finally, completely, what Eleanor had meant by that last line she'd written me. "Trust Sophia. Trust Diane. And Grant, please don't let this turn you bitter, even if it turns you fierce." She hadn't just been protecting my assets. She'd been protecting my capacity to still believe at the end of all this that the people who'd hurt me were still worth the fight it would take to bring them home. The evidentiary hearing 3 weeks later took less than an hour. With Kevin Marsh's testimony, my own certified forensic report, the bank's fraud documentation, and both Marcus's and Vanessa's cooperative statements, Judge Alvarez dismissed the guardianship petition entirely, restored full authority to me without qualification, and referred Todd Kessler's conduct to both the State Bar and the County District Attorney's Office for separate investigation into elder financial exploitation and fraud. Kessler lost his license within the year and was indicted on multiple counts. Last I heard from Diane, he'd taken a plea deal that kept him out of prison but not out of disgrace, working now, of all things, as an insurance claims processor in a town 2 counties over, reviewing other people's paperwork for a living instead of forging it. Vanessa entered treatment for what turned out to be a genuine, long-standing gambling and trading compulsion, and she and Marcus are still working, slowly, on whether their marriage survives what they built on top of hiding it. I don't know how that ends. I've stopped needing to know how every ending turns out in order to be at peace with the story so far. What I do know is that Marcus calls me every Sunday now, no folder tucked under his arm, no agenda beyond simply talking. And 2 months ago he asked, quietly, almost shyly, whether I'd be willing to walk him through some of Eleanor's old advocacy files, because he wanted to understand better what she'd actually spent her life doing instead of assuming he already knew. I said yes before he even finished the question, Whitney brings Lily by most weekends now, and Colonel Fluff has become something of a permanent fixture on my porch swing. Left there deliberately, Lily informed me, so the luck stays even when I'm not here. The porch light Eleanor used to talk about, the one that means being lost isn't the same as being gone, I leave it on most nights now, not because anyone's coming home late, but because it feels like the kind of small, steady thing Eleanor would have wanted kept burning. I still flinch sometimes when I hear that three-note chime over the hospital PA system. I went back to Providence Regional last month for a routine follow-up, and it played right as I stepped off the elevator, and my knees did the same thing they'd done 2 years ago. Buckled, just slightly, just enough. But this time Dr. Reyes happened to be walking past, and she caught my elbow without making a production of it, steadied me, and kept walking beside me the rest of the way down the hall, like it was nothing at all. Like grief, occasionally buckling a grown man's knees was just an ordinary Tuesday thing that didn't need explaining between two people who already understood each other. I think about that hospital room a lot, the one where this whole thing started, where I lay flat on my back listening to my own son talk about signing me over to paperwork nobody had asked me about. I think about how certain I was, in that moment, that I'd been left completely alone in the world, that whatever I'd built across 63 years had come down to a folder under somebody's arm and a hallway conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I was wrong about that, as it turned out. I was never alone in that room at all. Eleanor had made sure of it 3 years before I even knew I'd need her to. There's a signature at the bottom of every document I ever authenticated, and 31 years of studying them taught me the same lesson over and over in 10,000 different handwritings. The truth of who a person really is always shows up eventually, in the tremor or the steadiness of the hand, in the pressure they put down when nobody's watching closely enough to perform for. My wife's signature never once wavered, not on our wedding certificate, not on a single card she ever gave me, not on the quiet trust documents she filed 3 years before she died, protecting a man she knew might one day need protecting more than he'd ever admit. I like to think, walking out of that hospital now on my own 2 feet, cane in hand but head held level, that somewhere she can see the ink finally drying on the last thing she ever wrote for me, and that it says plainly, in a hand I'd know anywhere, "You were never as alone as you thought you were, Grant. You just hadn't found the letter yet. If you like this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more real, raw, and family-centered stories."